It is my great pleasure to introduce Sean Rintel. He is a researcher at Microsoft Cambridge. He has worked in the virtual event space for a long time. He is, in particular, the co-author with Abby Sellen of a wonderful, wonderful historical survey of where this technology came from and the issues that people have wrestled with over the years. And I hope he's going to give us a picture today of where we stand and where we're going. Sean.
Great, thank you very much. I can't tell if people can hear me or not, so I'm just going to proceed as if they can.
I hear you.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, so thanks very much, Ben and Nicole, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real honor, especially the one right before the workshop itself. That's really cool. So I'm going to talk about sort of this enduring issue, and I'm going to hope that I don't sound too much like an old man trying to sound sandbag soup today, in the sense that I hope I don't sound too grinchy about things. And the reason I say that is because there's definitely a sense in which some of the issues that I talk about are long-standing issues that are sort of, they're perennial, they keep on coming back again, and that's interesting and fine, but in a sense you would have thought that some of these would have been solved by now. By the same token, this field that we're in is quite, it really is a roller coaster. It goes up and down in terms of its interest, up and down in terms of the technology that can support it, up and down in terms of the social science that can support the use of the technology, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope it don't sound too grinchy. By the end, hopefully there'll be a lot more stuff that sounds more positive, but just bear it a little bit in mind that I might at first sound a bit grinchy. And here's the first grinchy slide, which is that thoughtless collaboration is poor collaboration, regardless of technology. And obviously this image is supposed to make that very clear, that here you've got technology upon technology upon technology, all of which are supposed to support each other, support the ability for these people and these individual cars to get where they're going, to be able to move between different places or different systems they need to get to each of the places. And in so doing, they have isolated themselves and they have kind of destroyed the environment in which they're actually living, to put a little of my greeny credentials on the line here. And this is thoughtless, right? You wouldn't have designed this way if you'd thought about designing a transport system, and it's sort of the same way with the various systems for computer-mediated communication, and for video conferencing, video mediated collaboration events and things like this, if you design it sort of from scratch now. Then again, that's also the nature of technology. It moves in these strange ways, and we're building upon all sorts of technical debt and all sorts of weird bits and pieces, and it's important to note that you can't just fix everything at once by fiat as well. So let's start with this idea of the next best thing to being there. You need to know about me that my primary area these days is video mediated collaboration. I'm moving a bit into the AR and VR world as well, but I spent a lot of time in the video conferencing world, although I studied other stuff before. This idea of the next best thing to being there was voiced by the magnificently named Julius P. Molnar of Bell Labs. He was the director of Bell Labs at the time, when he was talking about the introduction of the Mod 1 picture phone in 1969. He said clearly the next best thing to being there is going to be a picture phone call. And would that were so. And yet it's clearly not the case that video conferencing is the next best thing to being there. It's very good, but is it the next best thing to be in there? But then again, the other question is that really the right kind of goal anyway? So let's just, to set a baseline, think about some dimensions of presence that do matter. And I've stolen these from the really very clearly and great structured lit review, systematic lit review of Catherine O and Ballinson and Welch from 2018. So I really, really think that that's a great piece. And it starts off with this very clear introduction to presence, saying that you need to make sure that you don't mistake immersion and presence, or conflate immersion and presence, where obviously from Slater and Wilbur, Building on the Shoulders of Giants, immersion is about the capacity to generate realistic experiences, removing people from their physical reality, which is an interesting point, with presence being a subjective experience of actually being there in the mediated virtual environment. Now, these are kind of interesting because none of them really talk about what you're going to do with this presence. There's an assumption that you should just create it. If you build it, they will come, kind of thing. O et al. Then break this down into telepresence, self-presence, and social presence, or co-presence. And it's interesting to note that if you look at the definitions of each of those, admittedly only by one authors. More or less, they also just say how presence is created or what presence is sort of formed from, but not why you're actually being present. And this is really the key. This is really what I get to today. So one of the, I think, most misunderstood questions in the realm of presence is this idea of presence and media choice. A lot of people know social presence theory by Short, Williams, and Christie. A lot of people know media richness theory by Daft and Lengel. And a lot of people know this basic continuum and sort of assume that it's fairly easy to understand. And to a certain extent, it is, that at one side you've got your lean media, or lean engagement, if you want to not call it media, with things like static stuff, books and I feel like scrolls, papyrus, rocks with things carved in them, fairly static stuff, which lasts for a long time. But the production and reception of material is really asynchronous, and it uses very few modalities. On the other side, you've got the rich media, which is in-person interaction, which I've represented by not just talking, but dancing here, where you're really using all your senses. It's physical, it's kinetic, it has sound, it has movement, it has vibrations and haptics and these sorts of things. And sure, you can talk and you can look at each other and these sorts of things, and maybe you can even smell each other and maybe not during dancing taste each other, but the point is that there's more or less most of the central modalities which are engaged. And the argument is that in the sort of the most simple version of the argument is that in-person interaction is a gold standard. And that's what we should aim for when building anything where social presence matters. But that is, I think, the misunderstood argument, the sort of simplistic argument around these particular theories. And so it's worth just noting a little bit more carefully what they really said. Social presence theory does classify different communication media. It does use a fairly simple continuum. And social presence is equated to a degree of awareness, which is intimacy in relationship, basically. But if you were to try to pull out exactly the parts of the argument that really matter, what they say is they start with a when kind of statement. When parties are concerned with developing and maintaining an appropriate personal or institutional relationship in a community of encounter. So it's within a particular context. Success lies in choice of a communication medium. So it is not that in-person is definitively better. What they said is the choice is what matters, not the in-personness. And what does choice enable? Well, it enables appropriate social presence required for the desired level of interpersonal involvement. So whatever is being dealt with here is about interpersonal involvement. And some tasks and some collaborations and some engagements require interpersonal involvement, and some don't, and some benefit from interpersonal involvement, and some maybe suffer from interpersonal involvement. So the point here is that the choice is the key, not the in-personness. And media richness theory is the same in the sense that I think it's also kind of misunderstood, or at least it's oversimplified. Again, it's about choice of communication media. Based on adequate communication, this time of a complex message. They don't specify only interpersonal and relationships. Complexity is about avoiding miscommunication. So not just doing stuff richly, it's avoiding miscommunication. Specifically two kinds: uncertainty, which is the right answer for a question, and or, because they form this continuum, or two orthogonal continua rather, equivocality, finding the right question to answer. And so what they're after is, within an information richness sort of paradigm, when communicative efficiency is the goal, success, again, lies in choice of the communication medium. Note that if I go back, it's the same sort of key in the middle here, choice of communication medium. In this case, the situational ability to reduce miscommunication. Not necessarily saying that in-person is unequivocally always the best, ironically. So it's really important to note that two key theories, fundamentally based on the idea that, yes, in-person interaction is considered highly rich, don't say that therefore everything should be made that way, and that we should be always aiming for the best version of richness that we can. Really key. Why bring that up? I bring it up because, at least in my field, or the background in many ways of my field, there's a lot of richness that exists without video in video conferencing, or rather there's a lot of media that precede video conferencing that had a lot of richness, and I've always had a lot of richness that don't need video, or indeed all the full immersive, whatever that you might want. And so it's worth just noting that a little bit. So one is the good old landline telephone. All the stuff pre-exists even mobile telephone. And some of the earliest research on the telephone, especially from the conversation analysis field, was looking at intimate conversations between friends, families, partners, couples, these sorts of things. And one of the most interesting pieces here, even though this is quite late in the sense, 2000, was this piece by Drew and Chilton about calling just to keep in touch. So this is just getting on the phone, calling the other person and saying, hey, what's up? Or just calling every day and just starting to talk. And the example underneath the Drew and Chilton title there is actually from a different article, from Bolden's article, but it's quite similar, right? Where the person just rings, says hello, the other person says hi there, first person says hi, second person says, how is you? Second person, pretty good, good. What's new? Nothing much. Had a busy day today, right? She didn't show up. There's really nothing to this conversation if we think about content. It doesn't seem particularly deep in terms of the concept of truly intimate social presence. And yet, if you do this every day with somebody, this is quite rich and intimate. It's a little tiny step each day, understanding what's going on about the other person. There may not be much to it, but in fact, it's more the action of the call than the detail of the call that actually leads to the intimacy between these two people. The other piece that Elizabeth Stoker really brought to my attention a while ago when we were talking about is video conferencing the gold standard of collaboration and communication, is the work that she and others and many others have done on suicide prevention helplines. And I just want you to have a look at this list of things on the left-hand side here of that table, of the things of, and this is a table of respondents' feelings at the end of the last contact with the Samaritans, which is a UK suicide prevention helpline. Someone was listened to about being suicidal or lonely or afraid or anxious or happy or confident, were they understood? Do they sound hopeful? Were they depressed? Did they want to live? Do they feel cared for, supported? Were they given advice and was a solution found? This makes me quite emotional actually, because if this isn't intimate, if this isn't something that involves deep presence and yet doesn't have video, then I don't know what is. And in particular, if somebody on that Samaritan helpline can help someone move beyond suicidal ideation, that's quite amazing. And all you need is the voice. And in fact, maybe it's just the voice without all of this gear that goes along with it, right? The visuals of seeing the person, the distractions maybe of the face and the gestures, that allows you to actually be intimate in the sense of the social imagination of the other and talk through things that can move between the deeply concrete of suicidal ideation and the stuff that's just more emotional. That is intimate. That is presence. But it doesn't need video, and it does matter. Moving on to happier things. In computer-mediated communication, especially text-based communities, one of our great colleagues at Microsoft, Nancy Baim, has written for a long time on text-only online communities. This is one of her earlier books, Personal Connections in the Digital Age. She's written loads more, of course, about musicians and the way that they do emotional labor through social media to connect with their fans. A lot of this stuff, though, doesn't revolve around having the deepest possible, richest system with video or even all sorts of things. Sometimes it's just the text, just a few notes to fans to say that it matters. Or there are lots of online communities where people have told jokes, have gotten married, have just joshed around in just text, and that was just enough. And indeed, the fact that the bar to entry was so low, just text, meant that people from all around the world could engage with one another, feel quite present, and yet not have all of what we think of as the sort of amazing immediacy of video, or indeed VR and AR. And WhatsApp, I think, is a great example of this. Again, some other colleagues, this time here at Cambridge, UK, Ken O'Hara and others, would talk about everyday dwelling in WhatsApp and how important the fact that if you go into WhatsApp, and even if you're just exchanging a bit of text here, an image there, a bit of video there, maybe an audio clip, a meme here, etc., then the fact that you can do this all throughout the day without regard to necessarily where you are, or you can have your phone with you, but you can hide it under a desk and just send someone something funny, or send someone an I love you, or any of these things. This notion of dwelling together while apart on your own timetable but sort of strung together throughout the day, again, sort of partially through your social imagination and partially through the sort of convenient sort of list of things that had happened, can let you have multiple relationships with multiple people throughout the day, groups of people, individual people, family, friends, colleagues, whatever. Feel present, indeed be present with one another, really at the touch of a button, wherever you are, without the need for the real focus of a video conference or of an AR or VR system where you've got to put on a headset and completely get rid of the world to focus on that person. That's rich. It's rich not because of the particular medium that's involved, it's rich because of the flexibility of the system. It's almost as if the measure of richness should be flexibility and how well it fits where you are and the things you want to do, rather than things like the sort of immediacy of the other person. So let's talk about video calling itself and where that struggled with richness. I think one of the interesting things about video conferencing is that it's had the same model for almost 100 years now, depending on when you want to count video calling as started. Basically, it says you create a connection between two endpoints or more. You display that connection on a canvas, basically video and sound, screen and microphone and speaker, and you're done. Right? And all the engineers have to do is to basically make that better and better and better until we get the highest possible fidelity, and the social stuff takes care of itself. And what you get then is loads and loads of versions of video conferencing, quite an amazing history of video conferencing. If we look back to the sort of the dreams and imaginations of 1897 and 1910 of people imagining video conferencing in various kinds of postcards, initially imagining first domestic video conferencing, and only much later between people doing work. The first demonstration of a real video telephony system was 1927, far earlier than most people think. And mobile video telephony was envisaged as early as 1930, which is kind of crazy. Even crazier or most amazing is that the German post office had a working video conferencing system in the 1930s. You could go in, pay a few marks, I guess it was, pre-Euro, pay a few marks, having arranged it, of course, with your friend in another town, and you could see and hear them live in real time. World War II, unfortunately, put paid to a lot of the development there, but after that, we got the Mod 1 picture phone, which is where that quote about the next best thing to being there came. And yet the Mod 1 picture phone was a terrible failure, mainly because it was very, very expensive, although there were a lot of fun jokes, and one particular around presents, which I really like. The Mod picture phone was super expensive to use, so expensive, in fact, that even though AT&T imagined that it would be used between offices, sort of across cities or continents or these sorts of things, it was actually more often used within buildings. And it was used between floors in buildings, so you didn't have to walk up and down the floors, which is great. But here's a great, look, my system's going forward all by itself. Here's a great trick they were playing one another. An executive would come in the morning, and all of his mates would be there beforehand. And what they would have done is get a picture of the boss, a black and white picture of their boss, cut it out, and stuck it in that spot there where the picture of the person would be. And they'd say to the person coming in, "Oh, the boss is here and he wants to talk to you. He's on the picture phone right now, quick, quick." And the person just come in with straighten their tie, do their hair and all these sorts of things, and go and rush and start talking at this picture, at the picture phone. And because the picture phone was quite slow to update, it would take them several seconds, maybe half a second or a minute, to realize that in fact this was a still picture and the boss wasn't really there. This is a great joke in the 1960s and 70s, apparently. Many laughs. And of course, one based on presence, but actually one also based quite cleverly on the fact that this was deeply immature technology, and that the presence could be faked for some time or wasn't really well understood enough or wasn't good enough to know. But actually, what's more interesting than the failure here is the fact that light was able to be made of the problem that the system had. And in fact, the social presence that was actually engendered more by this was actually the personal engagement between the people in the office more than the people on the actual phone itself, which I think is always quite interesting. Then there's a history of sort of more development from AT&T in the 1980s, and then we get the IP video conferencing in the 1990s, and we get the first cell phone version of video conferencing, then we get beam telepresence robots, and then we get various versions of augmented reality and virtual reality stuff up through 2019, which is quite amazing. But you can see right up till 2019, basically it's people trapped in little boxes talking to one another. And these pictures, even the early ones, they look really evocative. But everyone knows that. Everyone who's lived through COVID over the last couple of years and all of the overuse of video conferencing through the last couple of years knows that These evocative pictures look really great when you talk about them. They seem it seems obviously that it should be the next best thing to being there. And yet you all know that there's something that's missing. It just isn't right about what's going on. And we feel that quite deeply. At Microsoft Research Cambridge, we ran a study during COVID on this sort of diary of the pandemic, but really we call it the diary of a meeting pandemic because that's what we found. I think in line with lots of other companies is that in Microsoft, we took all the meetings we already had and put them online. And then we made a whole bunch of new meetings for all the things we thought we were going to miss and put them online as well. And ended up with back-to-back meetings all through the day, every day during the week, like lots of other companies did. And in some ways that was a reasonable response, like it's a logical response, but it wasn't a particularly well thought out response in terms of what will it mean to have all those meetings all day, every day, multiple days per week, per month. Of course, we didn't know that it would last as long as it did. What is interesting to note, and it's fair to say, is that myself and my other colleagues in the video conferencing research also didn't foresee this. We never thought anybody would really use video conferencing this much day to day, except for some very small number of people in niche occupations. No one ever really imagined there'd be this much use of video conferencing all day. And so video meeting fatigue, even though the bits and pieces of it were sort of known, was never put together as a phenomenon or as a potential problem that could crop up, especially the idea that it might crop up during a time when video was the only way to connect to people. So we get things like in the reports and the diaries. We had over 800 people write diaries for a couple of months each during the pandemic. People talk about how it's having to find focus, turn-taking feedback signals and interpret them to get the full message is exhausting, especially as meetings occur throughout the day. So it might be fine at 9 in the morning, but it's really hard at 5 in the afternoon. Participant 31, I think, was particularly insightful. They said when someone invites you to a meeting, what they really want is your attention. What they're taking is your time. And collaborating doesn't mean doing everything together synchronously. And I think that's really important and interesting. There's definitely things that video conferencing is very good for, but not everything about every bit of collaboration requires that kind of synchrony. Especially things like maybe being together socially, as this person said. When it comes to trying to be social together, virtual happy hours can be quite grim, as they said. Grim compared to a real get-together. They left the call after 50 minutes or so. The conversation was pointless. I didn't feel at all present with others on the call. And then some people talked about how they replaced meetings with other stuff, right? So how they replaced synchronous engagement with other stuff, right? Replacing a weekly team meeting with one or two channels, a wholly different way of doing things and providing a whole different set of affordances. But nevertheless, leading to a point where they were collaborating well, but they were also understanding when to use video and when not to use video. Video meeting fatigue, as I said, really totally missed by many of us, and so apologies for that. It became apparent during the pandemic, and then it was brought to our attention, especially first. There was a lot of good work by Balanson and his group, who came up with a scale as well, the ZEP scale. And then there's been some others looking at it and sort of expanding the ideas of it a little bit since then. And there's interestingly this piece from Raka et al. About the multidimensional inputs into video conferencing fatigue. And the really key thing about it is that while we tend to think of it, and while I would say Balanson and others tended to initially think about it in terms of really its physiological aspects. So the fact that you're more or less immobile during the day, that you've got very strange versions of the sizes of people's head and shoulders, that eye contact is different, that the grid is a deeply unnatural and artificial way of looking at people, and that it's difficult to get your point across, that it's difficult to understand people's points, so the nonverbal feedback and reception. All those points are certainly true. They're not necessarily new in terms of video conferencing research, but it was the first time they'd all been sort of put together and then measured within a scale about this. But the point about video conferencing fatigue is not just these physiological features. It is that because video conferencing was used somewhat thoughtlessly, kind of used for everything because it was very easy to set up a video meeting and just do it. And then everybody wanted a video meeting. And then during the pandemic, we did all our work in video meetings, and then we also did all of our socializing in video meetings. We hadn't really thought about how to use it well, or when we should use it, or how to give ourselves good breaks from it. So it's the intense or inappropriate use of video conferencing that leads to fatigue. Not only these sort of physiological, social, socio-technical features. And that's really important. Again, it comes down to the choice of medium, not just the medium itself. And there's some recent research by Standard et al. About business objectives and technology capabilities. And they came up with this really pretty good matrix about what business meeting objectives need: audio, screen sharing, video, and whatever else it might be. And their basic point was that covering all business objectives, you need voice. So harking back to what I said about telephone early on as being enough. And of course, if you don't have voice in a call, unless you can use sign language, or unless everything you're doing is sort of purely about the visual, which is quite hard, then yeah, you can have video degrade in a call, but you need the audio to be consistent to enable you to actually do things in most meetings. So you need voice and you need screen sharing, because often that's where the content of the meeting is, and you can do lots of things by sharing content without seeing people's faces. You can do some of the most important things in most organizations: routinely exchanging information, whether that's, and also non-routinely exchanging information, clarifying concepts, exchanging different ideas, finding solutions to problems. All you need is voice and video of the content of the task. You don't necessarily need it of the person and everything related to that person's gestures and facial expressions. Now, some things, resolving conflicts, building trust, do benefit from facial expression and gestures. We would expect that. And also knowing what other people are looking at, which also means having one model of the room that everybody can know that when they point to this thing, everybody sees them pointing to this thing. It's called reciprocity of perspectives. So yeah, of course it is the point that video is important sometimes. It's important to certain sorts of things, but it's not important for everything. And again, this is about choice and about understanding or not understanding when to exercise choice around video. I want to say one more thing about video, but not about video calling, now about video messaging, which comes from some research that I did a few years ago when Microsoft boldly stepped out to create its first snackable app via the Skype platform, which is called Skype Quick, which I'm sure, unfortunately, most of you don't remember because it rose and fell rather quickly. It rose and fell quickly because it was a bold experiment in saying video is the richest thing there is. Video messaging is very popular. Therefore, purely video messaging is all you need, right? You can do everything you need by just having video. And so the way Quick worked was you made a video and then you sent it to up to a couple of hundred friends. Your video could be up to 49 seconds long. You sent it to them, and all they could do back is send you another video. If they sent another video, when you played the first video, it was tacked on, the second video was tacked on the first video, and then more and more and more and more and more until you could play the whole thing as one big long movie, or you could start the movie at any particular bit of the conversation and see it, as it were, go from there. It's a very clever idea. It was very clever technology. But the issue is it as easy to create a first video and audio as to create a second or a third or a fourth? Is it as easy to have an A, B, or A, B, C, or however many people are in the conversation with just video and nothing else, right? If the assumption that video is the richest form of communication holds, and that therefore it should be easy to have very rich conversations with just video, surely people should use it all the time. Except the problem is that's not what they do. Although some people did use Quick to send one another gifts of interaction, and that was quite fun. And you see similar sorts of things in these days in TikTok and Instagram and those sorts of things. But the biggest problem was, how do you respond to someone sending you video? And so interactions like the one here on the left were reasonably common. Indeed, this was one of the longer ones. So there's two friends, Beck and Anne. In this first exchange on day one, you see Beck and then Anne and then Beck. So Beck sends a video of herself doing a thumbs up to soup. This is because of an in-joke that they have between one another. Anne has been eating soup too much. Beck happens to be having soup that night, so she teases Anne by sending a video of soup with a thumbs up. How do you respond to that? Well, it's fairly easy. If you don't like soup, or if you want to express negativity, you could do a thumbs down. So it's actually quite easy to respond to that in terms of what video would you send back again. Although what's interesting here is that there's no sound in these videos. There's ambient sound, but they don't talk. So Beck sends a thumbs up, a tease about soup, and sends a thumb down. I'm having soup and I don't really like it. And then Beck sends a random dog. And there the conversation ends. Because how do you respond after thumbs down? And if all you can do is send video and audio. What do you do? Well, she looked for what was in the system. There was a random dog. She sent it. And there the conversation ended, because not only is a random dog random in terms of a thing to send, it's even harder to respond to when your previous conversation, to the extent that this is a conversation, is the pros and cons of soup. So there's no response to Beck on day one. Day two, Anne in the morning sends Beck a picture of a chocolate bar. Again, no talk, just a picture of a chocolate bar on a desk. There's no response. On the third day, Anne sends a picture of her dog rolling around on the carpet, and there's no response. When we talked to Beck and Anne afterwards and asked, why was it so hard to respond? They said, well, it's easy enough to sort of understand that someone's sending me an image about soup and respond, fair enough. But as she says in the second one here, in reference to the chocolate bar, if she just sent a message and I could just say what I thought to her film or something, rather than having to send another film back, because yes, I don't know what I'd send to accompany my message of, that's a healthy start to the day. So, because in Skype Quick, you couldn't send a lol, you couldn't show a laughing emoji, you couldn't show a picture, you couldn't write any text, it was only video. There's this tyranny of the response to the first message. That second position is super, super hard to respond to. So she didn't respond, at least not in Quick. Same with the third day, when Anne sent the picture of the dog. She said later on that she wanted to say cute dog, but she didn't want to literally say cute dog, and she didn't want to film herself saying cute dog, and she didn't want to point a phone at the wall and say cute dog. It was very hard to find a way to respond that didn't make her anxious about her voice and her video. So she just didn't respond. So what did she do? They talked in WhatsApp. They moved from the system that was inflexible, very rich, but inflexible, to the system that wasn't as rich, but far more flexible. Or if you want to argue if flexibility is richness, they moved from the unrich, non-rich, lean media of purely video to the very rich, very flexible media of WhatsApp. So what's important here is that, again, it's the choice of medium fitting the thing you want to do. And that could be as everything about the relationship, or something as quite amazing as talking someone out of suicidal ideation, to something as really granular as how do I respond to a picture of a chocolate bar. So how are we going to do better than this? I want to quickly show you a few concepts that we've been playing around with here at Microsoft around presence at different kinds of levels. So the first of these is something really, really sort of really lo-fi, something that we were playing around with last summer with an intern. And the idea here is that if anyone's used Microsoft Teams, shortly before the Teams meeting starts, if anybody joins the meeting before the time starts, we all get this little message in the right-hand corner saying, Fred's joined the meeting. If you join the meeting, you'll just see the whole meeting as it is. And you've got to sort of awkwardly sort of just be in that thing and talk to somebody. You can have pre-meeting conversation, but it's also within the frame of the meeting itself, contextually. People join, you can maybe talk, but the meeting's, as it were, already started. Even if the official time hasn't started, all you can see is the actual meeting room. And then when it ends, you press the join button and everyone's gone. There's no transitions. There's none of the pre-meeting talk. There's no ability to gently transition from pre-meeting talk into a sort of formalized meeting space itself. Nor is there any way to, in an ad hoc way, move out of the meeting during it and come back again. Nor is there any way after the meeting to have the meeting, to move out of the meeting room into post-meeting chat to do a debrief or those sorts of things. So we said, okay, what if we didn't create a whole system like Gather, where you're sort of spending a whole time in a world, but if when you started your meeting, it would put you into this, what we call the wandering space or the transition space, just a big blank space. And if you move a little avatar around it and you move towards one another, it would form eventually these circles of proximity. There was spatial audio, so you could hear the other person talking, and as you got closer to them, you could hear them more. And if you moved into the social circle, then you could hear them most clearly. And you could move in and out of those circles as much as you like before the meeting. And then when the meeting started, there was a banner saying, hey, the meeting's about to start. When it started, the meeting room would sort of grow. And you would then move yourself into the meeting, go and sit somewhere, wherever you liked. If you wanted, you could go out during the meeting and have a huddle with somebody and then come back in again. And when the meeting finished, the meeting room would shrink again, and you'd be left in the wandering space, and you could have a post-meeting chat if you wanted to. But you didn't spend all your time, in a map of the world. This was just sort of built into the way the rest of your day worked. And the goal was to say, could you enable more pre-meeting and post-meeting chat? And could you enable easier transitions into and out of talk between individuals and into and out of the meeting talk itself by just giving people this combination of time and space? brought together into one sort of prototype. We haven't done any research on whether this specifically works or not. It's an idea around what is the idea of time and space. It's really about making time for space and making space for time to enable these different kinds of pre and post meeting chats. They could be social, they could be productive. Just to quickly sort of show you what it looks like. I hope you can see the video here. There's no audio, by the way, so I'm just talking through it. You can see people moving around. They're forming their little circles. They're talking to one another. They talk for a while. It moves. If you're that person, it zooms in for you. If someone comes into your space, they join your circle, and you can hear them again with spatial audio. As we get closer to the meeting time itself, I'll just speed up a bit. It tells you the system's coming, and then the meeting rises up, and you can join the meeting, be wherever you like in the meeting, and at the end of the meeting, when the meeting's done, you can choose to move outside the meeting and go and talk to whoever you want, have a huddle, right? So it's not that different to a regular meeting, except that it makes space for this extra time to actually engage with one another. The next one I want to show is, so that's very lo-fi, very lo-fi. This is sort of medium-fi. This is the perspectives prototype. And what this does is it says it gives everyone, it has one ordering mechanism for everybody in the meeting, but each person gets a unique view, their view, and it's relative to everybody else in that order. So the differences between a standard video conferencing system, which is a more or less what you see is what I see system, which is very unusual because you don't all see everything from the same perspective all the time. We have our own perspective. So what the system does is it enables a remote person to join. We segment all the background out and we create a virtual table in a virtual room. We put everyone around it. We also do that for the people together in a local room. We have individual cameras looking at them. We segment them out. We put everybody into the virtual room. And what that means is because there's a local table, that everyone's sitting around that table in an order that is understood by the system, everybody sees the table from their perspective and sees the people in the order that everyone else is in, which means you can turn to your left and see someone, you can turn to your right and see someone, and you can do natural things like introducing oneself around the table. I'll show you again what that looks like with a bit of video. I'll just skip through it quickly. So the overview shows a table, you choose where you want to sit, and then you appear in the meeting. And each person, as you can see, I see it from my perspective here. I see Abby to my left. I see Shiraz and Corey, and then I see Carmen on my right. The local people see myself, Carmen, and Abby. They don't see themselves in the meeting. So everyone has their own spot in the meeting. And you can see we can look at it even more closely. It's a virtual table. It's very, very crude, but it doesn't matter that it's crude. If the goal here is to enable real-time round table conversation, this is really all we need. Modular the ability to share screens and things like that. So I'll skip to the next one here. If we want to go really high fidelity, if we care about going fully high fidelity, what do we want to enable there? What's the real value of going really high fidelity? Well, it might be that we want to go beyond just enabling conversational transitions or go beyond just being able to have a roundtable discussion and really make it feel for both the local people and the remote people that there's a sense of belonging here, that someone who is remote still belongs in the local activity space. And that's what Vroom does. I mean, it's a Frankenstein's monster of an application. It's just a prototype, but it's a fun prototype. In this one, we combine virtual reality, augmented reality, and robots together. And as you can see, actually, I'll show you on the next screen here. What we do is we basically put it all together. So the remote person puts on a virtual reality rig, headphones, and a headset. They see the world through a 360 camera on the robot, and then they can navigate through the world, and they can autonomously move through the world with this robot, but they're completely immersed in that world. So this is sort of standard full-on telepresence. You can walk down your hallway in the clothes that you choose. Unfortunately, virtual Sean is far cooler than regular Sean, as you can see. And you can meet people wherever they happen to be, including, say, outside meeting rooms. And you can do naturalistic things like waving to them in life size, and you can move with them into the room, and you can use, to a certain extent, physical whiteboards. You can at least point to them. Admittedly, it's a bit difficult to draw on them, but you can also move between places. So if you want to move from that meeting room to another room, go and visit someone at another desk or things like that, you can do that. So here, the value of the high fidelity prototype, where high fidelity means we give the remote person absolutely every possible way of engaging in that remote space with a robot and with virtual reality, and the people in the local space, we equip them with HoloLenses so that they can see a special version of the other person. So that's, a lot of tech, a lot of fidelity. I mean, you could make the avatar more high fidelity, but that's just a matter of time. What's the value? The value isn't presence. The value is belonging. If you want to create belonging, fine, go all the way. But you don't need to create belonging for every kind of collaborative act. I mean, that's a lot of technology to do a bit of collaborative whiteboarding. And even then, with this particular whiteboarding, you can't physically do the whiteboarding with the other person. So there's a real limitation there. If you did a digital version, you'd need some other screen that you'd both be engaged with. Finally, here's a kind of blended fidelity idea. It's really basically media spaces redux. If you know that the media space research from the 80s and the 90s in particular, pushed forward by Steve Harrison and Bill Buxton and Abby Sellon, my boss, then you'll know this sort of stuff. And what we're trying to do here is to think about how can we bring back this idea of media spaces for the hybrid world, the idea of how to enable a remote colleague to have a sense that the space that the rest of their colleagues might be in on that particular day, or maybe the space that they're often in, or maybe never in, still exists as a place which has culture and history and meaning and all those sorts of things. How can we connect those remote people to that physical space, that office space? And furthermore, how do we go the other way? How do we enable the people who are in the local activity space of an office, which has, as I said, place and culture and history and all those sorts of things? How do we enable them to connect with their remote colleagues? I mean, we could call one another on a video conference, or we could just use Gather, which is quite a good system, and we could sort of move around Gather and talk to one another individually. But what that doesn't quite get to is the hybrid situation. How do you enable hybridity in this situation? How can I stand at my desk, as I'm doing right now, and talk to one or more people throughout the day, rather than calling them, but sort of ambiently engage with them, maybe pipe up to join in, or if they hear something remotely, how can they know that I'm standing here and then there's a postdoc there and another postdoc down there? How can they just hear what's going on and pipe up to join in some conversation that they're not necessarily part of, and that when they're remote otherwise, they have no chance of hearing? So we're thinking about all the ways in which, what are the transitions between sort of not being together and being together that you'd need to create some sort of ambient all-day awareness. And we think you need at least three kinds of awareness, right? You need the ability to sort of glance into that space. And I'm using visual ideas here, but of course I'm not just talking visually. A way of glancing, so just checking to see who's around, what's going on. But that does need to be super high fidelity. And then if you want to move it up a rung of fidelity, how can you monitor what's going on a bit? So see whether or not someone's actually at their desk or when they might be free to engage. And then if you want to engage, how can you then engage with them in real time? So what we don't want to do in sort of using sort of some old-fashioned systems is just sort of stream real-time video and audio 24/7 on both ends. So I don't want to, and I shouldn't have the right to see into my colleague's home from my desk, in high-resolution video and audio and see everything that's going on. That's a huge invasion of privacy. And similarly, I don't really feel like standing at my desk all day and having a remote colleague look at me standing here all day while I scratch myself and pick my nose and eat my lunch and those sorts of things, even if it's otherwise convenient to potentially talk to me. So how do we enable that? We're playing around with ideas. These are indicative kinds of concepts. They're not at all, they don't represent any kind of Microsoft product prototype or real product at all now, so don't take this as that. But the idea here is that you've got two ends, local and remote. You've got three kinds of systems, glancing, monitoring, engaging. And you can imagine that the local version, that is where I'm standing and looking at a physical apparatus, which is sort of awareness window to my remote colleagues, might show sort of something like a gather town where you've got a map of, as it were, this space here. And my remote colleagues who might have desks here assigned or might have a space assigned in that gather town world, I can see when they're sort of moving around that space. And if I want to engage with them, maybe I can. But otherwise, what I just see is a very low fidelity version of them. Maybe like this one here, where if a remote person's dialing in and looking at me in that space, what they see is some sort of very low fidelity version, maybe altered by some sort of filters to take out a lot of stuff, maybe even fully reconstructed in virtual reality and just letting the other person know that there's someone there, but not actually showing the real space. If you want to move, and you can also imagine that being very low frame rate, like 0.2 frames per second or something like this. You just need to see every now and then when someone's around. Maybe if you want to monitor it, see something in a bit more clarity, see the actual motion, whether or not someone is maybe close enough to this window to talk to or not. Maybe it moves up to some version of higher fidelity, but still not exactly the same. I mean, I've put a very extreme blur on this, but the idea here being that the colleague in that local activity space doesn't want you to sort of look at them in huge amounts of detail if you're just sort of checking in to see whether or not they're around. It's only when you get to the engage level that both sides really have full audio and video. And you can see here I've got the pictures of both people sort of showing. And this means that now they're sort of engaged just like a video meeting, but only for the ad hoc period of time that they want to spontaneously engage. So the idea here is we need something to connect people all through the day, whether they're remote or hybrid, but we don't want to just stream high fidelity video and audio through the day. We also don't want to just have, for example, an interface where we're sort of driving a robot or an avatar around the map. That's fun and useful and important and all those things, but that in and of itself isn't a hybrid solution. So we need a hybrid solution as well. Okay, I want to finish with something that's missing even from all that stuff, but I know time is getting close, so I will make it reasonably quick. Holland and Stornetta wrote this very famous piece, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, called Beyond Being There, where they talk about how there will always be a disadvantage for the remote people, and it doesn't matter how good the technology is, that ultimately it's a matter of what you're trying to achieve with the technology, not the technology itself. There's always going to be a difference. And I've shown you a bunch of solutions to sort of various levels of fidelity and making various choices around the thing that you want to do. But even that's not really enough. Something is still missing, because ultimately the things I've shown you still pretty much just show you a connection and a canvas, to be honest. What's missing? What's missing is accountable reasoning, right? Showing the choices to one another, being clear about the choices, and knowing whether or not those choices are appropriate for what you're trying to achieve. So you need connection, but you need flexibility. I'll explain this in a minute. Yes, you want a canvas, but you need to be able to experiment with, is this canvas working for you? But you really need this intentionality made clear to you and augmented by the system in ways that maybe it's hard for you to do. So what do I mean by this? 3 things. So intentionality, I mean the ability to explain organizational team and project goals. So whatever it is that you want to do, not just sort of create a system whereby you can do X, but everybody can make it clear to one another why they're doing X and why this medium has been chosen for doing it. And it's not just about what I do. It's about what we do together as a team, because who we are together in technology is not the same as who we are together in person. We have technologized team relationships where the media is an active participant in what we're doing. And this shouldn't just be about, can I do some action? So can I see some visual? Can I see gesture? Can I see a face? It's about, can we make a balanced choice about when is it important to see someone's face and gesture? By flexibility, I mean empowering people to have the right combination of tools for the context and to change between contexts. So can I have seamless connections, which means easy connections, right? I can easily connect my phone to my laptop or my phone to some public big display, but seem full in the sense that I always know which things are connected when, and then I can make good choices about when things should and shouldn't be connected and why they're connected at a particular point in time. And crucial along with that, how can we use the tools we already have, the ones we have to hand and already know how to use? We know really well how to take a picture or a mobile video with the mobile phone. Why are we not trying to use that more when doing, for example, whiteboarding with physical whiteboards? We could. We just don't make it really easy to do so. We don't tend to think of the phone as being part of the system whereby we can do it. In fact, you can in Microsoft Teams. There's a system called Companion Mode, where you can easily join your phone to your laptop without any conflict between the two, and you can use your phone as a roving camera to stream video into that meeting. And when you're done, you just turn the phone off and it's done. And it doesn't create echo or howl. It doesn't create a lot of problem with the system. But admittedly, it's a bit hidden inside the system. We need to make that kind of awareness, those sorts of connections, really obvious. And finally, really crucially, we need to empower teams to make decisions with their own data. And what that really means is 2 things. One, even we, Microsoft, as a productivity technology company and leader, shouldn't assume that there's a one-size-fits-all solution to any kind of collaboration. There isn't. Right? There's loads of different kinds of meetings. There's loads of different kinds of cultural and geographic and other kinds of contexts. And we can't just provide a million different features and hope that people will figure out how to choose them. That'll never work. Then we'll get the 1090 problem. So what we need is that the system itself, the video conferencing system, the VR system, the AR system, shouldn't just simply provide the connection between two places. It should help everyone understand what's going on, and then maybe even do tests on what's going on. Figure out, should I connect using this, or should I connect using this? Should I use this kind of shared whiteboard, or should I use that kind of shared whiteboard? The system should enable people to track what happens there, to let one another know, hey, let's do a test for this month about whether or not to use this whiteboard or that whiteboard, for example. Which one's easier to use? And at the end of a month, after doing maybe 2 weeks with that one and 2 weeks with this one, we as a team can see what's happened in the meetings. We can look back at some data and make a reasoned choice about why we should use that one versus the other one, instead of just sort of intuitive choices or the choice of the most important person in the room. Until systems go beyond just producing a connection between two places, that help people understand why they are connecting and how best to connect, and to understand their own organizational or even social practices, then these systems won't go beyond sort of pure commodities. If you want a system to go beyond a pure commodity, you have to give people a reason to be there, and just providing a connection between two places, even if it's really cool, isn't really enough. It has to help people understand when they're getting value from it. This is my belief. So, I believe in choice, not chance. And I believe that we should be designing reasoning into our collaboration technologies. Yes, we sometimes need to drive fidelity of presence, but not full presence at all times. It's presence through user goals. And people should be able to explain and validate whatever goals with respect to whatever presence we create. And with that, I'm done. Thank you very much indeed, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.